Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolfe and Gavin Schall here. And for this weekend edition, we will be finishing up our June mailbag questions. Gavin, what are we getting into in this final mailbag episode?
Some hypothetical draft trades and some fun Knicks questions, including whether RJ Barrett or Julius Randle is more likely to be an all-star next season. That's a tasty one. All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We wanted to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform of choice or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube, where, of course, you can see our smiling faces every day and even get into arguments in our comment section. The comment section has been hopping, so if you're looking for a new place to talk Knicks with people, definitely check out the YouTube comments under the video if you go there. But who are we? I am Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. He is Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And we are getting into some questions from you guys to finish off our June mailbag here. The first one comes from Twitter. It is from Buy Low Sell High at swing_trade55. And this is actually directed at us along with a few of our contemporaries, CP from Knicks Fan TV, John Macri, and Jeremy Cohen from Knicks Film School. So shout out to our buddies here, but we're answering it. We're going to choose to throw this on the show. Question, guys. Thoughts on the Knicks trading number 11 and number 42 for number 13 and number 15 from Charlotte. Draft Mark Williams and Jalen Williams, same last name, not the same lineage. I'd like this a lot. Need to trade Randle for a mid to late round number 1 in any draft. I don't know if that means the Randle's meant to be included in this deal. Gavin, you and I were kind of talking about this before the show. I think my thought was I think this is maybe closer to a viable deal than we think, and you think it's pretty far off. So I'll let you lead the discussion here.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Charlotte would be crazy to do that. In this draft, there just isn't enough of a difference between the person you're getting at 11 and the person you're getting at 13. And I know over the years, we've seen situations where teams are willing to do deals that on paper look really bad just because they're in love with a specific prospect. Very famously, it didn't get pulled off, but the Boston Celtics allegedly wanted to trade 4 first-round picks to move up and get Justice Winslow. But I guess here's a good example. The Charlotte was in love with a specific guy, and they turned down this deal because Charlotte wanted Frank Kaminsky. So they turned down 4 first-round picks for Frank Kaminsky. So Alex, I'm talking myself into this on the air. Maybe Charlotte's the team that would be down for a deal that's just stupid, because it's objectively very stupid to trade 11 for 13 and 15. We were doing a little bit of research beforehand. We saw they had Shaedon Sharpe in for a workout. Maybe they fall in love with him. Maybe he's the quote unquote Justice Winslow of this year's draft, and they want to move up to 11. That's the reason they would do it. But I think it'd be nuts. I don't think this trade is realistic at all. I think it's somewhat plausible. Maybe if the Knicks wanted to throw in their 2023 Dallas pick, and obviously there's a case to be made that that's more valuable just because it's in that 2023 draft, but you're almost trading like 11 and probably something like the 24th pick a year from now for 13 and 15. That makes a bit more sense to me. The other issue with this is just the idea that the Knicks might not want to bring in 1 rookie. I'd be surprised if they wanted to bring in 2 rookies. I would personally be very on board with it, but it seems like, again, the focus to some extent is still on making the playoffs next year. And just given the depth that they have on the wing and even in the backcourt, I know not necessarily a point guard, but sort of a point guard. How are you going to play 2 guys? So I have a lot of issues with this, Alex, but I know you think it's a little bit more realistic and you'd be a little bit more on board with it.
Yeah, and I think that deal that you were mentioning, wasn't it? It was Boston that was trying to trade up.
Yeah. But
right.
Charlotte didn't want to.
Charlotte turned down 4, allegedly 4 first-round picks. It's like the only time that Danny Ainge ever actually tried to include picks in a deal. So yeah, I mean, if they feel that steadfastly about their guy, clearly they're willing to turn down 4 first-round picks. Maybe they're willing to trade 2 first-round picks, to move up to get a certain guy. I will say one thing while we were researching a question for the next segment. We actually stumbled upon something that maybe makes this a little more viable to me, at least. We were trying to look up and see who Shaedon Sharpe has worked out for so far. And the only one that we could find is that he worked out for the Hornets today, apparently. And the Hornets obviously have picks 13 and 15. It doesn't seem entirely likely that Sharp would make it to 13 or 15 unless he really takes a tumble. So, yeah, maybe he's the guy that, that he would be like, okay, he made it to pick 11, and the Knicks are like, maybe they do like, Mark Williams or Jalen Duren or something like that, and think that, one of those guys is going to be available at 13, and then they can take another, more project type player at 15. Maybe it's a Jalen Williams, maybe it's Ousmane Dieng, who we talked about yesterday, something like that. I guess I wouldn't totally rule it out. I'm kind of with you. I don't think it's super likely. I think it would depend on if Charlotte can find that guy that they really think is the guy to trade up for. But we've seen crazier things happen. I mean, I can remember when we were sort of floating the idea of like a couple years ago, like, I think it was in the Knox draft, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of people were floating the idea of like, would the Clippers trade like 11 and 13 to move up to whatever it was, 8 or 9, wherever they took Knox at. And, that seemed somewhat reasonable. I mean, it's like if there's a guy, but maybe it's just that allure of like a top 10 pick, that sort of has a little more shine to it, even though honestly the 5 to 10 range I feel like has a way worse hit rate than just outside of the top 10. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about, but not something that I think would be particularly likely without greasing the wheels too. Now, maybe you could get it done if you include like, I don't know, Deuce McBride or something. Maybe that's enough to sort of push them over the edge on that deal. Maybe you could do it with veteran help, to be honest. I mean, Charlotte was a fringe playoff team this year. And so maybe they're like, well, we're about to hand Miles Bridges a bunch of money, most likely. They've got LaMelo Ball, who's going to need an extension, and it will be extension eligible the end of next summer. And they've got sort of this core that's starting to reach its like maturation point of, needing to get paid. They already have Rozier making a good amount of money, stuff like that. So maybe they would be inclined to take, do that deal, trade the 2 first-round picks for the 1, get a guy in Sharp who's more of a project, but also get back like, I don't know, Alec Burks or Derrick Rose or something like that. Someone that they think could be a good veteran presence. I mean, Derrick Rose would certainly be like a much better version of, say, like Isaiah Thomas, who was pretty weirdly key to Charlotte's run this year as like a 10-day contract guy. So I don't know. But I wouldn't totally rule it out. I just feel like there would probably have to be some sort of other sweetener, whether it's extra draft compensation or a veteran player to help Charlotte with their pursuit of becoming like an actual playoff team.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. But if you want to bet on the Knicks making a draft day deal, or you just want to throw some money down on the NBA Finals, there's one place you can go and do that, and it's betonline.net. They're your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL Hockey Conference Finals, Major League Baseball, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. But I want to circle back to this year's basketball championship matchup, and there's some interesting odds on there. I'm predicting the correct series score. Or so the Celtics winning 4-2 is plus 200. The Celtics 4-1 is plus 300. The Warriors 4-3 is plus 300. You go really crazy at the Warriors 4-2 at plus 700. There's a reason the Celtics in 6 is the favorite. That's probably what I would bank on. But I like the idea of going Celtics in 5, or if you think there might be some kind of injury, maybe going Warriors 4-2 if you think something's going to happen to Jason Tatum. I don't know. That's a little morbid, but bet on what you will. It's your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online where the game starts. And with that, Alex, we're back continuing with this mailbag, and we got ourselves a fantastic question. It starts off, good morning, Gavin and Alex. I initially thought this was GM Gavin and Alex. We're getting called by our future titles as co-general managers of the Knicks. But this questioner wants to know, Marcus Morris bought us pick 23. Can't we do this with Burks, Randle, Fournier, DeRozan this draft or any future draft? Build assets if we don't move up. Use cap space to extend RJ, IQ, Obi, etc. Keep building. #Knicks. Alex, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this one also came from buy low, sell high at swing_trade55 on Twitter from the first segment. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I just brought that up to end the last segment as far as, maybe one of those guys could be used to grease the wheels with a, would-be playoff team like Charlotte. And I do I think there's something to be said for the fact that this year the East really leveled out in a way that it hasn't in a while, and everybody was pretty good. Like the Knicks missing the playoffs had a better record than the two play-in teams or the two lowest play-in teams in the West. I mean, I think that really says something about how much better the East got this year and how comparatively bad the West was. And maybe there's some West teams that really want to try to, seize getting back up into the playoff picture or get better. That I'm looking at some of the later teams in the first round this year. I mean, like Memphis has picked 29. They obviously, were the number 2 seed in the West this year, but also had I would call it a disappointing run in the playoffs. I mean, they made it to the second round, but like they looked as if, and I mean, you could say too, like Morant got hurt. Yes, that obviously hurts them, but they look like maybe they need a little more juice, maybe a little bit of veteran help, and maybe they're looking for that in the form of like some of what the Knicks have to offer. And the 29th pick, they think, all right, we've really done our work through the draft at this point. Now let's bring in some established NBA veterans and really try to make a run at this thing and maybe try to become a championship contender. We've seen in the past that's not unreasonable that teams make those sort of moves eventually. Like the Warriors, for example, kind of did that back in the day when they said, okay, we have Steph Curry, we have Klay Thompson. It clearly looks like we're working with something here. That Draymond Green was kind of being developed, and they picked up David Lee, and then they decided, okay, let's go and make this like winning move and go get RJ Iguodala, who at the time was just a solid vet. Like he had been more of like a superstar in the past with the Sixers, but then when he was at that stop with the Nuggets, he was just kind of like the player that he ultimately was on the Warriors, which was a really good role player that wound up being a big swing player for them winning their first championship. So it's not unreasonable to think that maybe Memphis would look at their level of team building right now, look at the fact that they still have cap space, if I'm not mistaken. Like they operated under the cap this year, I think, which is really crazy, and say, okay, we've got some extensions coming up here for some of our key players, so we're going to be over the cap sooner than later. Let's take advantage of the fact that we have this cap space now, and it not being a great free agent class, maybe we can make a trade and, bring some players right into our cap space and then have them here for the long haul, along with the rest of this young core that we've built up. So that's a team that I look at. They actually have 2 picks. They have their own at pick 29 and pick 22 from the Jazz. So like, again, too, it's like how many rookies do they realistically want to bring in to that team? Maybe the answer is all of them. They seem to love taking every player that draft Twitter loves every year. So maybe that's what they want to do. I don't know, Gavin, that's just one team that stands out to me. Are there any teams that look good to you in that respect?
That's a good question. I mean, I think Memphis is a great candidate because you want to look for teams that just don't have room to play more young guys. I would put the Hawks, honestly, pretty close to that category. I feel like they're hitting a tipping point with Trae Young to some extent, where they just want win now help. The way I look at this is, does anyone on the Knicks offer that, right? Because obviously the Knicks don't have someone the caliber of an Andre Iguodala. Derrick Rose, as of a year ago, would have been their best candidate, but I think reasonably teams will question, all right, how healthy, well, not how healthy is this guy going to the year, but is he still the same guy he was a year ago after missing a full season of basketball? A lot of times you look at an older point guard who, despite his improvements as a shooter, still predicates a large portion of his game on athleticism. And you fairly ask, like, heading into his early 30s, he misses a year. Is he going to be that same dude? Because that version of Derrick Rose, I think, was 1,000% worth a first round pick. We often talk about how he was the best player down the stretch for the Knicks on that 2021 team. And I think he, in the right context, could be a game changer and sort of similar to Iguodala, not in that he's as good of a player, or at least as good as Iguodala was at that point, but sort of similar in that he can swing a title for you. I don't know if that guy exists anymore. And then I look at the other guys that the Knicks have, and the other guys mentioned here, Randle, Burks, Fournier, D. Rose. Are those guys swinging titles? maybe in the right context. Like I think Fournier, for example, would be a really interesting fit on Memphis. Julius Randle, if they moved off John Collins in some kind of separate deal, I think he would be a pretty good fit around the Hawks, and just putting another guy who's at the very least a theoretical floor spacer around Trae Young. It feels like Burks can fit in on any team in the NBA. So I think you sort of nailed it. It's sort of right team at the right time. I'm just going through here. Philly can't trade their first round pick. Milwaukee's sort of an interesting one with that 24th pick. I'm not sure if they can trade their pick because I think they might owe next year's to the Pelicans. But if they could, that would be fascinating. Dallas cannot trade their pick. Miami, I think they can. That would be, I guess if they wanted, they definitely wouldn't want Fournier or Burks. I guess Randall to Miami, if they miss out on Donovan Mitchell, is maybe sort of intriguing. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I could maybe see that happening. I mean, of all teams, Miami, I think probably has the best case for like, we have the culture, like we can plop anybody in here, bring the best version of themselves out. They would probably look at a Julius Randle and be like, all right, we'll throw this guy in here with Jimmy Butler. You know, at his best, Randle has that same sort of mindset. It seems like the work mindset. And, you know, also just like sort of a chip on his shoulder, which might meld well with Jimmy. And again, we see them take guys just absolutely off the scrap heap every single year and turn them into functional, you know, rotation players on teams that go ahead and, you know, become like, you know, number one seeds and stuff. Like, it's kind of crazy what Miami does, you know, every single year in and year out. So yeah, I could see Miami potentially taking that swing and being like, we see the talent. Like, we know that we can do this because we're the Miami Heat, as much as I hate to give them that much credit. That said, though, I mean, if I'm the Knicks and I'm looking at that, and I still think 30 years later, there's no love lost between like Pat Riley and the Knicks. I wonder how much trepidation there would be about being like, all right, yeah, we'll take the 27th pick for Julius Randle to make an in-conference team that we have to see like 3, 4, maybe 5 times a year that much better potentially. I question how much they would do that. Like, I feel like for a Randle trade, if they were going to sell relatively low, they would probably prefer to go out of conference just so that they don't have to deal with that headache every single time. But I could see a world where if Miami was willing to like spice things up a little bit with some future pick considerations or something, that maybe the Knicks would do it. But I don't think that they would want to come out, you know, and potentially have like within a month or two next year have to be dealing with hearing about how Pat Riley, you know, screwed the Knicks once again. I don't think that would be high on their priority list. So I do question a bit how motivated they would be to deal with Riley and the Heat for that reason.
The Knicks might look at it like they're sending a headache to Miami instead of creating their own headache. So that's possible. But Alex, you know, you talk about Heat culture. I want to talk a little bit about Sakara culture, because that's how you build good culture. It's eating right on a day-to-day basis.
You got to build good culture in your life, and that can start with Sakara, which is one of our sponsors of the episode today. Feeling your best starts with what you eat, and Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. True radiance starts on your plate. Made with high-quality organic ingredients, Sakara's plant-rich, transformational nutrition programs are expertly designed to deliver real results, from reduced bloat and eased digestion to clear skin and boosted energy and moods. And I can tell you, I mean, I got to experience Sakara firsthand, got to eat some of the meals, and they are really fantastic. You know, it's all vegan. And there were some things that, as someone who eats partly vegetarian, because my wife's vegetarian, and partly, you know, as a meat eater, I've had a lot of plant substitutes in my life, and I've never quite had some of the ones as good as what I had in Sakara. There was a goat cheese made with cashews that blew my mind. Tasted just like goat cheese, which is a really hard flavor to replicate. And on top of that, had a pasta bolognese with like soy crumbles that were imitating ground beef. And you could have fooled me. I would have thought it was ground beef or sausage or some sort of ground meat mixed in with that. Really delicious food. And the best part is that It all comes packaged and basically ready to eat. The most you'll ever have to do is heat something up in the microwave or on the stove real quick. Otherwise, you don't have to worry about it. It's all right there for you to eat. And it's all extremely healthy for you. I did feel a lot of the energy and increased mood and everything else that Sakara advertises. Sakara is a wellness company, it should be noted, anchored in food as medicine, on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. They give you the tools needed to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. And their nutritionally designed, chef-crafted breakfast, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful, plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockedon20 or enter code lockedon20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockedon20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/lockedon20. And Gavin, we're back to continue getting into these mailbag questions, and we're going to be finishing off with a few last questions from our buddy Jordan Bubb at Bub Jordan on Twitter. Jordan always comes locked and loaded with tons of questions, so unfortunately we were not able to get to all of them this time around. Some of them we honestly felt a little unqualified to answer because there were some deep cut draft questions and stuff, which maybe we'll save and hand to a draft expert at some point so we can get an actually educated opinion. But our first question from Jordan here: what happens in the pre-draft workouts or in the pre-draft workout process, and how much do pre-draft workouts and interviews help draft prospects move up and move down, or how important are these workouts for teams? Kind of a broad question, but I would say in general, I think they're very beneficial. A lot of players sort of skip doing combine stuff, particularly high-level players, to do workouts sort of on their own terms. And granted, when you're going to a team, they're going to dictate the workout and put you through the motions that they want to put you through. But you can also decide which teams you want to go to and that sort of thing. So like sometimes if a player prefers a certain team, they can swing the draft in that way by only working out for that team and trying to influence things that way. Famously, we saw that happen with Kristaps Porzingis with the Knicks back in the day. He refused to work out for Philly, which then made Philly pass over him with pick 3, got the Knicks him at pick 4 instead of Jahlil Okafor, which I think for everything that went wrong with the Porzingis situation, the Knicks came out way in the good in that situation, and that was sort of just how it was planned. You could also look at, I believe there was reporting that Tyrese Halliburton did that in the 2020 draft, sort of wanted to get his way to the Kings and found his way there, only to eventually get traded. So maybe a poor decision on his part, but that was certainly an example of pre-draft workouts working out for the player. And then there's, of course, Gavin, the famous story of Kevin Knox besting Miles Bridges in a group workout, and apparently David Fizdale going up to Steve Mills and Scott Perry and saying, "Get me that guy." And Kevin Knox.
I was having a nice Friday, Alex.
Yeah, and then I just had to bring that one up. That's the most famous draft workout story I can remember. But that's, I think, the long and the short of it. Unless, do you have anything to add in regards to the pre-draft workouts?
I do not. So I will keep it moving to our next question from Jordan. He says, what is more likely to happen? The Knicks sign Mitchell Robinson to a fair deal, or the Knicks sign Mitchell at an overpay? I'm going to say overpay, just because I do think there's a market for him. Right? Usually when you get a quote unquote fair deal for a guy, it's because there isn't a bad team that really wants him. And I think there will be a bad team that really wants Mitch, because there's going to be a couple of teams. I'm mainly thinking of the Detroit Pistons. I think the Sacramento Kings will be in this mix as well, and a couple of mystery teams that will be going after DeAndre Ayton. Inevitably, a whole lot of those teams will miss out on DeAndre Ayton, and then they will try to throw a lot of money at a Mitchell Robinson player, but does fill that facsimile, at least on the defensive end of the floor, but fairly versatile rim protecting center who has turned himself into a fairly dominant rebounder. So I think if the Knicks sign Mitchell Robinson, it's going to end up being closer to $15 or $16 million than $12 or $13 million. And again, it's all what you decide is fair, right? Because fair is ultimately dictated by the market. But for a guy who's had a lot of injuries, hasn't really developed his offensive game, and as we noted, has not really improved as a screener, I will say that he, thanks to the market, might make a little bit more money than you'd think a guy who fits that description should.
Yeah, I tend to lean towards Mitch getting, I guess, I would say I think it's more likely that the Knicks sign him to a quote unquote fair deal, just because I don't know if his market's going to be quite as robust as what we think. Like, I don't think some team is going to throw him, let's say, like $18 million a year or something like that, or even like 16. I think that he'll probably get like 13 million a year, maybe, or maybe 14, which I think you and I are both kind of on the record saying is a fair deal. So I think I would say, I guess I think maybe the Knicks would have to overpay him a smidge, just like if Mitch and his agent are sort of giving the Knicks like honorary restricted free agent rights. But I think if he ends up re-signing with the Knicks, it would mean that the market wasn't that robust, and the Knicks just say, "Look, we'll give you a nice contract to come back. We liked your contributions, and we definitely want to bring you back here. So let's just make something happen." But I think if some team is willing to go above and beyond to sign him, I think the Knicks will just say, "Okay, bye, see you later." I think that's all it'll come down to. But our next question from Jordan here: what's more likely to happen? Will Emmanuel quickly become a starter, or will Alec Burks or a mystery point guard become the starter next season? Gavin, I'll throw that one to you first.
Yeah, I might just be setting myself up for pain here, but I'm going to go with Emmanuel quickly just because Jalen Brunson is the overwhelming name in that conversation, right? And look, someone, to his point on framing it as a mystery point guard, someone could emerge completely out of left field and be like, wow, I didn't know Damian Lillard was available for trade, or I didn't know the Suns were giving up on Chris Paul already. Like, who knows what's going to happen? And I've said it before, I do think the Knicks will make a move that will shock us and be pretty unexpected. So maybe it comes at that point guard position. But if you're like me and you presume that Jalen Brunson is staying in Dallas, I think Emmanuel quickly just becomes the clear-cut best option. Tibbs has at least leaked out to reporters that he regrets not playing the young guys more down the stretch, so he'll have a golden opportunity to put his money where his mouth is. I think, if anything, Tibbs has lost some sway in the organization to the point that the idea of trotting Alec Burks out there as the day one point guard will prove to be intolerable, even if that is his preference. I think it's more likely Derrick Rose would be that guy if someone were to usurp Emmanuel quickly, but I'll go with my gut and say the Knicks don't make a big move. Quickly makes another mini leap over the offseason and proves himself in training camp and in the preseason as the guy, as the starting point guard. But Alex, crush my dreams. Feel free to tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, I want to believe that, but until proven otherwise, unfortunately, I'm just going to assume that Tibbs is going to make the wrong decision at starting point guard, because he has yet to make the right decision throughout his time with the Knicks. And that goes back to the 2021 season. As good as the Knicks were, and as good as his overall coaching was that year and everything else, really like squeezing the most out of that team, it's arguably he didn't squeeze the most out of that team because he started Elfrid Payton for every possible game that he could have. I mean, he threw Elfrid Payton out there in the starting lineup, even if it was only for like 12 minutes for the beginning of the first and third quarters. And it just made no sense. And I still to this day don't understand, for a guy that clearly understands basketball at a very high level and who has some really great things to bring to the table, his talent evaluation of the point guard position, at least at this stage in his career, is absolutely horrendous. And I don't understand it at all. So whether it was Peyton, whether it was sticking with Kemba Walker for way too long this year, and giving him the most minutes in the league of like any starting lineup for the first 40 plus games of the year before Kemba got shut down, it's just, I'm more inclined to believe that he's going to make the dumb decision before the smart decision of just giving quickly a hand and saying, you know what, here, go ahead. Like, you can run the show for a little bit. No pressure. We'll guarantee you like 30 minutes. I'll allow you to make some mistakes here and there, and you can do it. I just don't see it happening. I also think, on top of the fact that I could, just as you said, potentially see like a Derrick Rose being named the day one starter or something like that, I could also just as easily see them signing Jalen Brunson still. I'm not willing to rule that out yet. I mean, I know it's being reported now that Dallas is, more willing to pay him, particularly after how well he played in the postseason and everything else. But I'm not there yet with saying like, oh yeah, that Dallas is definitely going to re-sign him. Like, it's going to be a lot of money, and the reality is, because of the luxury tax implications, like whatever they sign Brunson for, they're basically signing him for like 3 to 4 times that amount. because of the amount that they're going to get charged in luxury tax just by virtue of signing him. So I think it's a situation where I would be inclined to say that Tibbs is going to make the wrong decision before the right decision. But Gavin, final question, and we can keep this somewhat brief, but who's more likely to become an all-star again, RJ Barrett or Julius Randle?
I'll say RJ Barrett, and again, maybe that's just trending towards personal optimism, but I think he's a pretty good chance of making an all-star team next year. I'd be surprised if he doesn't put up something around 24 points per game next season, especially if Randle's dealt. Obviously, that's a pretty significant swing factor, but we saw him put up near all-star numbers down the second half of last season. His efficiency is going to have to improve, but this is a guy who's come back with something new in his game every single offseason. So I think whatever he needs to add, he will. And if not this year, the next year. Julius Randle, again, took an all-time efficiency season for him to hit those all-star marks. I could see him in a new situation, putting up big numbers and doing so somewhat efficiently, but I just don't think he'll have the same spotlight that he did in New York. And if he stays in New York, I would just be stunned and thrilled, but mostly stunned if Julius Randle became an all-star again. But Alex, are you on board with that little bit of optimism to end this show?
I think RJ is more likely to become an all-star if both stay Knicks. I think there's maybe a chance that Julius could reclaim all-star form on another team with a clear head and a fresh, start. And, like we mentioned, that Miami scenario would not surprise me at all if he and Jimmy Butler both made the all-star team or something. Although there's Bam Adebayo there as well to consider. So, it's like pretty rare for a team to get 3 all-stars. But if he goes to a better situation next year and the Knicks lean into the youth and don't have a great record, which means that, like, even if RJ is a 22 point per game player and, has improved efficiency and improved role and everything else, he might not make the all-star team thanks to team performance. I can maybe see Julius getting back there faster, but I would say that it's about equal to me. But if they both stay Knicks, I definitely think it's more likely that RJ becomes an all-star just because he would get the groundswell of fan support and probably coaching support too, particularly if he takes a leap and continues being the focal point of the offense like he was with Julius Randle on the team to end this year. I think it's more likely that RJ does. The only caveat there is if Julius is on another team, I could see it being Julius first. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Locked On Knicks. Thank you all for all the great mailbag questions to lead us off in June here. And we'll, of course, be doing that again in July, which will be a much different. Actually, maybe we'll do one more mailbag right before the draft or something. I don't know. Like maybe we could bring a draft friend on because by the time we hit this time again, it'll be a much different landscape. We'll be into free agency. So there's a lot coming up in the next month. We'll, of course, have you covered on Locked On Knicks because we're here every single day, 5 days a week for you guys talking about the Knicks. So thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon. Peace out.